But if they got the reading on the pacemaker through the app, what other readings did they see prior to that? That's a great question, but that's a 41-minute window. What was happening inside the house? They've had full access to that house. We saw the blood on the doorstep. Well, there's been no details provided to the public over what they found when they got inside. What did the bed look like? What did it look like? There was signs of struggle. We don't have any detail from inside the home.
1:47 in the morning. That is where this story begins. Not with a phone call. Not with a neighbor. Not with a news alert. It begins with a timestamp, logged automatically, silently, inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman who had no idea that the small device keeping her heart in rhythm was about to become the most important witness in a federal investigation. No camera captured what happened next. No neighbor heard anything. No passerby saw a single thing out of place on that quiet street in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. But something did see it. Something recorded every second of it with a precision that no human witness ever could. Her own heart. And what that heart recorded, what it logged, timestamped, and stored in the moments that followed, is the reason the FBI has been sitting with this data for over 3 months. It is the reason forensic cardiologists were brought in. It is the reason this case, despite the silence around it, has never actually gone cold. The device inside Nancy Guthrie's chest did not stop working when the cameras went dark. It kept going. And now, after months of decoding, analysis, and forensic reconstruction, the results are in. They are not comforting. They are not vague. They are specific, time-stamped, and deeply disturbing in ways that most coverage of this case has never come close to explaining. This is the real version. The case file version. The version that starts at 1:47 in the morning and does not let go. Before getting into the data, before walking through what the FBI's forensic cardiac specialists found inside that cloud record, there is something that matters more than any timestamp. There is a woman at the center of this story. And it is far too easy, in a case this technical, to forget who she actually is. Hi viewers, here is a simple question for you. Before today, did you know that pacemakers could record data the way a phone records a call log? Drop a yes or a no in the comments right now.
There's some detail outside the home that could actually inform a little bit more of the decision making, and that's where you get to the blood spatter experts. So anytime you have blood, and I'm not an expert in this, but work with people who are, you look at things like impact. You can tell from blood spatter if it's impact. You can tell if it's cast off or if it's just dropping. So the other thing that would let you know about the blood is, was that from an assault? Did she trip and fall, which she's scared? So a lot of data that's going to help solve this case.
Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the longtime anchor of NBC's Today Show, a face that millions of Americans wake up to every single morning. She is also the mother of Annie Guthrie, who lives in Tucson and who had dinner with her mother on the evening of January 31st, 2026. Annie's husband, Tommaso, drove Nancy home that night. She went inside. The lights eventually went off. And that was the last normal moment. Nancy was not a public figure. She never wanted to be. She was a woman who raised her children largely on her own, a woman who loved her garden, who attended church on Sundays, who spent quiet evenings on her porch watching the Arizona sky settle into night. She had a pacemaker, a small implanted cardiac device that had been helping regulate her heart rhythm for years. She had a home monitoring unit in her bedroom, plugged into the wall, quietly syncing her cardiac data to a secure cloud platform at regular intervals. She was not extraordinary in the way the world measures extraordinary. She was extraordinary in the way that actually matters. And on the night of February 1st, 2026, at 1:47 in the morning, something came to her door that changed everything. The street she lived on, North Jenner Drive in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, is the kind of street where nothing happens at 1:47 in the morning. Quiet. Residential. Low overnight traffic. The kind of neighborhood where a person can live for decades and never once feel unsafe in their own home at 2 in the morning. That is exactly why it was chosen.
It was at 2:12 a.m. that the software detected a person on camera. That's sort of vague because we know she didn't pay for a subscription. The police said there's no video available. So whatever it is that the camera does, it somehow identified movement on the camera and identified that as a person and shot that over as an update coming from the camera.
Because the figure that approached Nancy Guthrie's front door that night was not lost, was not confused, was not stumbling onto the wrong property by accident. This was someone who knew exactly where they were going, exactly what time to arrive, and exactly what they needed to bring with them. 2 bags, gloves, all black clothing, a slim, athletic build somewhere between 5 feet 10 and 6 feet 2, a masked face, and a specific, deliberate knowledge of where the doorbell camera was positioned and how to disable it. At 1:47 in the morning, that camera went dark. The street saw nothing. The neighbors heard nothing. And from the outside, looking in, there was nothing to indicate that anything had happened at all. But inside Nancy's chest, a small electronic device had already started telling a very different story. Her heart rate spiked. Suddenly, sharply, at the exact same moment the camera went dark. Not gradually, not over the course of several minutes the way a heart responds to exertion or slow-building anxiety. This was acute, instantaneous, the kind of cardiac response that forensic specialists have a very specific name for. It is what a conscious person's heart does when they are suddenly and severely frightened. Nancy Guthrie was awake. She was aware. And in the space of a single second, at 1:47 in the morning, something made her terrified. The camera recorded the threat arriving. Her heart confirmed she felt it. And neither of those two things is a coincidence. They are the same moment, captured by 2 completely different recording systems, pointing to the same undeniable truth. Something happened at 1:47 a.m. inside that home on North Jenner Drive. Nancy Guthrie has now been missing for more than 90 days. She is still out there, somewhere. And the device inside her chest, the same device that recorded her terror in real time on the night she disappeared, has been running continuously ever since, logging every beat, every hour, every day that she has been gone. The FBI decoded the data it could access. What they found inside it is what this story is about. Most people think of a pacemaker as a heart regulator, a small device that sends electrical pulses to keep a heart beating in rhythm. And it does that. But that is only half the story. The other half is what turned a routine cardiac implant into the most critical piece of evidence in a federal missing persons investigation. Modern implanted cardiac devices are data recorders. Every heartbeat, logged. Every irregular rhythm, logged with a timestamp. Every time the heart rate climbs above normal, logged. Every time it drops below normal, logged. Every significant physiological change the body moves through, captured and stored with a precision that no human observer could ever match. And beyond cardiac data, many modern devices contain accelerometers. Sensors that detect physical movement. Sensors that can distinguish between a person walking voluntarily and a person whose body is being moved by someone else. Nancy's pacemaker had all of this. It also had something else. It was connected to a home monitoring base unit sitting in her bedroom, plugged into the wall, quietly transmitting her cardiac data to the manufacturer's secure cloud platform at regular intervals. Not once a day. Continuously. Automatically. Without Nancy having to do a single thing. That cloud data is what the FBI subpoenaed in the first week of February 2026. The manufacturer complied immediately. And what the FBI's forensic cardiac specialists found inside that cloud record, what they spent weeks decoding and analyzing and cross-referencing against every other piece of physical evidence in this case, is what transforms this investigation from a missing persons case into something far more precise. Far more chilling. There are 5 evidence points. And they need to be understood in order. Evidence point 1.
Is there's also a risk factor involved in this, is that you're only going to drive so far and do so much. before you run the risk of being stopped by law enforcement on a traffic stop, maybe have an accident, things like that. So there's a lot of things coming together, but the biggest thing you got to do is that house is a system. It's a closed system. Start from there, look at the iPhone, look at the watch, and bring all this stuff together, because then your analysis that you launch from that can be more targeted and more directed.
The surveillance image. At 1:47 in the morning, a doorbell camera at Nancy's front door captured a masked figure approaching the property. Dressed entirely in black. Slim, athletic build. Somewhere between 5 feet 10 and 6 feet 2. Gloves on both hands. 2 bags. Moving with a kind of deliberate calm that does not belong to someone who is lost or confused. At 1:47 in the morning, that figure disabled the camera. The footage went dark. That is the last external visual record of anything at that property. Evidence point 2. The pacemaker spike. At the exact same moment the camera went dark, Nancy's pacemaker logged a sudden and dramatic spike in heart rate. This was not a gradual increase. Not the kind of slow climb a heart makes when someone is startled from sleep and takes a few moments to orient themselves. This was acute. Instantaneous. Forensic cardiologists who have reviewed this type of pattern are consistent in how they describe it. It is the cardiac response of a conscious person who is suddenly and severely frightened. The spike at 1:47 and the camera going dark at 1:47 are not two separate events that happen to coincide. They are the same moment, recorded by two completely different systems, telling the same story. Nancy's heart confirmed what the camera captured. Evidence point 3. The full digital forensics log. This is where the picture sharpens into something that cannot be misread. At 1:46 and 58 seconds, the front door sensor detects motion. At 1:47 and 2 seconds, the doorbell camera begins recording. At 1:47 and 15 seconds, the masked figure appears on camera. At 1:47 and 18 seconds, the pacemaker logs a significant cardiac event. Heart rate spikes. Rhythm becomes irregular. At 1:47 and 20 seconds, an audio analysis tool flags an unusual sound event from inside the residence. At 1:47 and 50 seconds, the figure leaves the camera frame. The camera is disabled. And then, at 2:28 in the morning, the pacemaker sync with the home monitoring unit stops. 41 minutes. 41 minutes of complete external darkness. No camera. No phone activity. No GPS signal. But the pacemaker recorded every single second of it. Every beat. Every shift in rhythm. Every physiological change Nancy's body moved through inside that window. Evidence point 4. Physical evidence recovered at the scene. 2 bags. Gloves. Items entirely consistent with someone who came prepared. Not a spontaneous intrusion. Not someone acting on impulse in the middle of the night. A planned operation. Someone who knew exactly what they needed and exactly what they were going to do when they got inside. Evidence point 5. The location itself. 5830 North Jenner Drive. Catalina Foothills. Tucson, Arizona. A quiet residential neighborhood. Low overnight traffic. The kind of street where someone can arrive at 1:47 in the morning and be completely gone before a single light turns on in a neighboring window. That is the case file. 5 points. 2 recording systems. 1:41-minute window. And what happened inside the window is the part that the FBI has been most careful and most disturbed about discussing publicly. The first thing the pacemaker data established about that 41-minute window is something that investigators needed to know immediately. Nancy was not asleep when this began. That matters more than it might seem. A person pulled from deep sleep does not produce the kind of acute cardiac spike that the pacemaker logged at 1:47. The physiology does not work that way.
It was then at 2:28 a.m. that the pacemaker app, which obviously this tells us they got a hold of the app, the app showed disconnect from the phone. It says 2:28 a.m. That means she could be down the driveway. We just don't know. But to John's point about the Bluetooth reaching about 100 feet, we know the phone was left behind and the pacemaker could have been about that distance away when it disconnected.
A sleeping person, startled awake by a sudden noise or disturbance, produces a slower, more gradual heart rate response as the brain moves from sleep to awareness. What the pacemaker recorded at 1:47 is categorically different. It is sharp. It is immediate. It is the response of someone who was already conscious and alert and who registered a threat in real time. Nancy was awake. She was aware. And at the precise moment that masked figure disabled her camera, her body already knew something was terribly wrong. That detail is not a minor footnote. It is medically significant, because it means Nancy experienced the beginning of what happened to her. She was present for it, conscious. And her pacemaker recorded that consciousness as a physiological fact that exists completely independent of any testimony, any account, any version of events that anyone could construct after the fact. Her own heart was the witness, and her heart cannot lie. But here is where it gets more disturbing. The spike at 1:47 does not come back down. In a normal startle response, even a severe one, the heart rate climbs and then returns toward baseline within a few minutes as the nervous system recalibrates. That did not happen here. Nancy's heart rate stayed elevated. The rhythm continued to show irregularities that forensic cardiologists associate with a state of extreme and sustained emotional distress. Not a clinical emergency, but not calm, not safe. Not the pattern of a woman who heard something alarming, checked around, found nothing, and settled back into her evening. This is the pattern of a woman who was in the presence of a threat that did not leave. Whatever caused that spike at 1:47 was still there, still present. And Nancy's body was responding to it for an extended period of time, not for seconds, not for a minute or two, but for the kind of sustained duration that tells investigators one thing with absolute clarity. The threat persisted. And so did her awareness of it. Then, approximately 15 to 20 minutes into the 41-minute window, the data changes again. This is the finding that investigators have been most careful about. Nancy's pacemaker contained an accelerometer. And an accelerometer does not just measure whether a body is moving. It measures the character of that movement, the rhythm of it, the origin of it. When a person is walking under their own power, the accelerometer records a specific pattern. Rhythmic, self-directed, voluntary. When a person's body is being moved by someone else, when they are being carried or transported, the pattern is different in ways that are clinically identifiable. What the accelerometer recorded in this phase of the 41-minute window is passive movement. Not Nancy walking through her home. Not Nancy moving from one room to another. The movement signature in this portion of the data is consistent with a body being transported by an external force. And the duration of that movement, the sustained, continuous nature of it, is consistent with being placed inside a vehicle and driven away from the property. Let that land for a moment. The data inside Nancy's own chest shows the moment she was carried out of her home. It shows the moment she was placed into a vehicle. It shows the beginning of a journey that, as of this recording, has not yet ended. And then, in the final 10 to 15 minutes before 2:28 in the morning, the data changes one more time. This is the finding that the FBI's forensic cardiac team has described as the most clinically significant discovery in the entire analysis. The heart rate, which had been elevated throughout most of the 41-minute window, begins to shift in a very specific way. The natural variation between individual heartbeats, what cardiologists call heart rate variability, begins to decrease significantly. And decreased heart rate variability in this clinical context carries a specific meaning that is not open to much interpretation. It is the pattern a heart produces when the central nervous system's normal regulatory influence on cardiac function is being chemically suppressed. When awareness is being altered.
But if they got the reading on the pacemaker through the app, what other readings did they see prior to that? That's a great question, but that's a 41-minute window. What was happening inside the house? They've had full access to that house. We saw the blood on the doorstep. Well, there's been no details provided to the public over what they found when they got inside. What did the bed look like? What did it look like? There was signs of struggle. We don't have any detail from inside the home.
When the body is responding to a substance that is affecting the brain's ability to maintain full consciousness. The clinical language for what the pacemaker recorded in those final minutes is pharmacological sedation. Someone administered a sedating compound to Nancy Guthrie before 2:28 in the morning. And that single finding changes the entire profile of whoever did this. Because sedating compounds capable of producing this specific cardiac signature are not available over a pharmacy counter. They are not something a person stumbles into possession of. They require a procurement trail, a prescription history, a clinical connection, a hospital or medical supply source, or an alternative acquisition channel that itself leaves a traceable record. You do not accidentally have that on your person at 1:47 in the morning. You plan for it. You acquire it deliberately. You bring it with intent. This was not impulsive. This was not opportunistic. This was architecture. Someone designed this night from beginning to end, and they had the resources and the connections to execute it exactly as planned. At 2:28 in the morning, the sync between Nancy's pacemaker and her home monitoring unit stops. And for weeks after this case became national news, that timestamp was reported in a way that caused serious and lasting damage to public understanding of what actually happened. Multiple outlets reported that Nancy's pacemaker stopped at 2:28. That her heart stopped. That the device went silent because Nancy was gone. That is not what happened. The sync stopped. The wireless connection between the pacemaker and the home base unit was severed. The most probable explanation, given that the accelerometer data had already shown vehicle movement, is that Nancy had been transported far enough from her home that the monitoring unit could no longer reach the pacemaker signal. Or that someone disabled the base unit directly. Either way, the device inside Nancy's chest did not stop. Her heart did not stop. The data at 2:28 shows a sedated but functioning cardiac rhythm. Not cardiac arrest. Not the device entering a post-event non-pacing mode. Nancy Guthrie was alive at 2:28 in the morning on February 1, 2026. That is what the data says. Then on April 6, day 65 of the investigation, 2 handwritten notes arrived at TMZ. Both from the same sender. Both delivered on the same morning. The first note claimed Nancy was dead. The second note, sent within hours of the first, claimed the sender had seen Nancy alive in Sonora, Mexico. 2 notes. 1 sender. 1 morning. Completely contradicting each other. Retired federal investigators called the notes fraudulent almost immediately. But here is the detail that makes those notes not just fraudulent but also revealing. The pacemaker data at 2:28 does not show cardiac arrest. It does not show the device entering the mode it would enter if the person carrying it had passed away. It shows a beating heart. Sedated, yes. But beating. Whoever wrote that note claiming Nancy was dead was not working from any knowledge of the pacemaker data. They had no access to what the FBI decoded. They were guessing. And their guess directly contradicts the most medically precise evidence in this entire investigation. The notes told investigators something important. Not about Nancy. About the sender. Meanwhile, the DNA evidence was moving through a process that had already been complicated by a mistake that cost this investigation time it could not afford to lose. In the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, investigators collected 2 pieces of biological material from inside her home. A rootless hair sample, and biological material recovered from a bedsheet. Rootless hair is among the most difficult evidence types to process using standard DNA methodology. The root is weather.
Sandra, I've been obviously following a lot of this and writing on it on my Substack. The biggest thing you've got to do as a former detective is you've got to narrow down that timeline. You've got to narrow down those constraints to the smallest possible window, because then you decrease exponentially the amount of data and things you have to do. And for me,
cellular material typically used for DNA extraction is concentrated. Without it, conventional testing often yields nothing usable. But the FBI did not rely on conventional testing. The biological material was sent to Australa Forensics, a California-based laboratory that specializes in low copy number DNA analysis and touch DNA recovery. Techniques designed specifically for exactly this kind of degraded or incomplete biological evidence. And working alongside that laboratory is C.C. Moore, one of the most respected forensic genealogists currently practicing in the United States. A specialist who has used partial, degraded DNA profiles to identify biological relatives of unknown individuals in cases that had sat unsolved for decades. The methodology is called genetic genealogy, and it does not require a direct match in a law enforcement database. It requires a partial profile strong enough to identify a biological relative in any public genealogy platform. From that relative, investigators can build a family tree. And from that family tree, they can narrow the field to a name. This is not theoretical. This is a documented forensic process that has produced convictions in cold cases across the country. But before that DNA ever reached the right laboratory, something went wrong. During a live television interview, the Pima County Sheriff was asked directly where the DNA evidence had been sent for analysis. He said Florida. The FBI had indicated the evidence was going to Quantico, Virginia. Two different answers. Two different laboratories. Two different stories, delivered publicly, on camera, while an 84-year-old woman was still missing. The DNA eventually reached Quantico. But the path it traveled to get there, and the weeks that path consumed, represented a failure in coordination that this case, given the urgency of the circumstances, should never have experienced. There were other mistakes. Details about the Bluetooth detection effort, the signal sniffing equipment the FBI deployed around the Tucson area to detect the specific low-power signal that Nancy's pacemaker emits, were disclosed publicly on multiple occasions. Nancy's pacemaker, like most modern cardiac devices, broadcasts a short-range Bluetooth signal when near a compatible monitoring unit or clinical programmer. The range under ideal conditions is approximately 15 to 30 feet. To detect that signal, investigators need to be within that range of Nancy's physical location. The accelerometer data gave investigators a geographic constraint to work from. Vehicle movement beginning approximately 15 to 20 minutes before the 2:28 sync cutoff suggested that Nancy had been transported somewhere between 12 and 25 miles from her home by the time contact was lost. When that radius is overlaid on a map of the Tucson area, the highway corridor running south toward Rio Rico and the border with Mexico falls directly within it. That is not a coincidence. And publicly disclosing the existence and methodology of the Bluetooth detection sweep gave anyone with even basic technical awareness exactly the information they would need to keep Nancy away from any device that could detect her pacemaker signal. That is a mistake with consequences. On May 6, 2026, a television special titled The Nancy Guthrie Mystery aired on the CW network. 3 experts sat in front of a camera. Dr. Ann Burgess, the criminal profiler whose work with the FBI over several decades was the foundation for the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Brucato, forensic psychologist at Boston College and co-author of peer-reviewed research on targeted violence. Dr. Casey Jordan, criminologist and behavioral analyst with decades of case experience. All 3 of them arrived at the same conclusion. The masked figure who approached Nancy's door that night, the person investigators have referred to as Porch Guy, was almost certainly not the person running this operation. He was an instrument. Someone operating under instructions. Someone who was given a time, a location, and a set of directions by a person who never appeared on any camera. And all 3 experts agreed on something else. Porch Guy was likely already gone. Eliminated by the same person who planned this, as a calculated measure to remove a connection between the operation and its architect. Think about what that tells investigators about the person they are actually looking for. This is not someone who panicked after the fact. This is not someone scrambling to cover their tracks in the days following the disappearance. This is someone who anticipated exposure. Who planned for it? Who made a calculated decision to remove a loose end because the operation itself was too carefully constructed to allow for one? That is the profile of someone who does not make mistakes by accident. That is the profile of someone the FBI is now hunting with the full weight of forensic genealogy, a procurement trail for a controlled sedating compound, Bluetooth detection sweeps across a 12 to 25-mile corridor south of the Catalina foothills, and the decoded contents of a pacemaker that recorded everything. FBI Director Kash Patel used a specific word when asked about this investigation. He said that if the Bureau found nefarious conduct or conspiracy, they would make the appropriate arrests. The FBI does not use the word nefarious without reason. They do not deploy that language in front of cameras unless they already have a basis for believing it applies. The pacemaker gave them the timeline. The DNA at Quantico may give them the name. And somewhere, in a direction that leads south from a quiet street in the Catalina foothills, an 84-year-old woman who tended her garden and attended church and had dinner with her daughter on the last normal evening of her life is still out there. Her pacemaker has been running continuously since 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. Every day. Every hour. Every minute that has passed since the sync went dark, the device has been logging, timestamping, recording. Every moment of fear. Every moment of stillness. The complete physiological diary of everything Nancy has experienced since the night she disappeared is stored inside a device the size of a small matchbox, inside a woman who deserves to be home. The FBI found something deeply disturbing in the data they were able to access. But the full record, the complete truth of those 90-plus days, is still inside Nancy. And the only way to read it is to find her. There is a development in this case that most channels have not yet connected to the pacemaker findings. Something that surfaced in the weeks following the DNA submission to Quantico. Something involving a specific name, a forensic result, and a piece of information that investigators have been extraordinarily careful about keeping out of public circulation. That information is coming. And when it does, it will reframe everything covered here in a way that makes the 41-minute window look like only the beginning of the story. Do not miss the next video. Because the next piece of this case is the piece that changes the question entirely. Not who was at the door, but who sent him there, and how close investigators now are to that answer.